Yeah. Cancel. Yeah. What's the goddamn deal? Yeah. Let's do it, bitch. Now here's a little story that I got to tell about a young gangster nigga.
you
matter what I do, I'm stuck on you. I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. Yeah, no matter what I do, I'm stuck on you. I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. I got deja. Stay tonight. Hopefully this time I can stay right. Hopefully this time I can lay by. I don't need an iPhone for that FaceTime. Off the rip, I'm a piece of shit. She legit. It's a love triangle, but it fits. Baby, this is good as it gets. No matter what I do, I'm stuck on you. I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. Yeah, no matter what I do, I'm stuck on you. I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. I got deja. Stay high, can't lie. I just gotta keep you off of my mind. I just gotta stay on my grind. You get the whole day, I just need the nighttime. I don't wanna fight. It seems like we do this shit and rewind. Seems like you only need some me time, baby. I wish I could freeze time. No matter what I do, I'm stuck on you. I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. Yeah, no matter what I do, I'm stuck on you. I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. Yeah, I got deja vu. I got deja vu. I know my mind ain't playing tricks on me. Right now everything is moving slow. This shit is real. I know. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Topical, Tech's best talking show. I am your host, Brian Ross, and today we're talking about one subject really in depth. Normally we have three, and you can count them 3 topics, but today something interesting has happened in the world of technology. Whenever that happens, we want to dedicate the time necessary to it. And in fact, we have a viral sensation here today, and we're going to be talking all about it. We're talking, of course, about graph theory. And what is graph theory, you may be asking? I know I'm asking the same question. I don't actually know. I just started streaming, and here we are. But we all are going to learn together. I'm very excited. But before we get any farther, let's go ahead and introduce our guests. The reason why California has harder waves is because of this person making waves in the graph theory community. It's back-end web concentration student at Make School, Sid Archidiacono. Welcome, Sid.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Sid, also a return guest here at Tech Topical. You love to see that, don't you? Our next guest, a computer whiz. It is time to walk with Elias. It is Elias Wambugu, a high school student and Make School admit coming in the pipeline. Welcome, Elias.
Hello, thank you for having me as well.
Super excited to have you. I know you can't really see, but Elias's setup is like super crazy. I'm jealous. How could he do that? But I'm very happy for you, Elias.
Thank you.
I went to Best Buy and I spent a whole bunch of money on all the streaming equipment. So now I'm like really in tune with the differences in people's equipment. I saw yours. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. When I grow up, I want to be like you, Elias. Why graph theory? You know, I thought it was pretty cool, but apparently it's cooler than you thought. Our guest here, Sid Archidiacono, Sid has written an article, and just so you know, I'm not cheesing you. If we go all the way down, we see just how many claps it got, because that's the first thing I always look at. I don't look at the title, I don't look at the content. I just want to see how many claps did it get on Medium. And if you go all the way down, 74 claps. 74 claps is much different than 74 likes on Instagram. 74 claps on Medium means that everyone in your immediate network knows about it, and people have started sharing it outside of their network. And that's, I think, the greatest compliment you can get as a content creator is when someone you don't know shares your article with someone else that you also don't know. And I'm sure that's happening because 74 claps. Who knows 74 people in real life? Not me. Well, maybe at this point. But anyway, why graph theory is cooler than you thought. And this was very interesting to me because apparently graph theory has changed the game. And I was really curious as to what exactly the implications were. So I want to go ahead and bring everyone up to speed. Let's read this. Let's read this first paragraph and see if we can figure it out. And then luckily we have an expert to tell us. But what are graphs, you may ask? I'll use my professional voice. Are you ready? So here, I'll use my radio voice as if this was a, big radio show. So here we go. What are graphs? Talk to a scientist in just about any discipline and ask them the question, based on their discipline, how that stuff works. You'll likely find that there are systems and networks you have to consider before you can really understand how any given thing works, whether that's the human body, a food chain in an ecosystem, a chemical reaction, or a society as a whole. Without understanding the relationship between two animals in an ecosystem, two atoms in a molecule, or cells and tissues in our body, you just have a bunch of data, a list of cells, a readout of animals and what they eat, etc. Sid, I want to ask you, what does that mean? so how does this relate to graph theory? So we have to understand the relationships between things. Is that what graph theory is?
Yeah, so you can totally think of it like that. And I think that's actually the best way to think about graph theory is to think of the word network. So kind of interchangeably in the article and interchangeably in a lot of the things that I was reading to research this topic, people are using the word network with graphs. And we're familiar with the word network, right? So we're familiar with the word like networking or social network. And that's exactly what a graph is. So if you scroll down, there's actually a super helpful diagram. A graph is basically a collection of data and their connections to one another. So this example is like a social network. So Brian, we're connected on LinkedIn. I'm also connected to maybe Jordan on LinkedIn. I'm also connected to like Jeremy, the founder of Make School on LinkedIn. Jeremy's connected to all these other people that I don't know. Actually, I don't remember. And I'm connected to all these different people on LinkedIn. And they're in turn connected with a bunch of other people. So we call in graph theory all of these circles, these colored circles with pictures on them, nodes. And we call these little things in between them edges. And you could also think of this as points on a map, right? My house is a specific spot. And to get to the grocery store, I follow all of these different roads that connect all of these other buildings, all of these other nodes to each other. And then I get to my other destination. But there's a connection there. There's a connection in terms of, the geography of my neighborhood. So when you look at graph theory, what you can see is more than just, the first example kind of wanted to illustrate. If I want to talk about how animals like interact, I could list out all of the animals in a given ecosystem. For example, like I live in West Oakland. Around here, I guess there's not a ton of wildlife, so we probably have like rats and like stray cats and like
the
some
ecosystem of West Oakland.
It's wild. So if you want to look at some different wildlife, you're going to look at like the pigeons. What do the pigeons eat? What do like the rats eat? What do the cats eat? Well, the cats probably eat the rats, but if I don't know that relationship, I just know that like cats, rats, pigeons. Okay, what does that tell me? Does that tell me anything? Does that tell me like that my like trash cans are gonna get like knocked over by like birds trying to get it? I don't know. But similar to human relationships, I can list people, but that doesn't tell me anything about the people.
Interesting.
So, we've really like listified a lot of data in our life, and specifically we've listified a lot of things to be able to give them to machine learning models. But nowadays, since like the deep learning revolution, we're doing a lot more than just basic linear regression, y equals mx plus b, here's the slope, predict the next point. along like the line of best fit. We're doing things that are a lot more advanced than that now. And what really helps us do that is understanding how the data is connected with one another. And graphs allow us to do that. So graph theory is actually a mathematical theory, prior to being like a computer science theory. And, this mathematical theory kind of helps us look at how are these things connected? And then we can say, okay, so, we can do a lot more with that information than just having like a list of people, for example.
Very interesting. So okay, Elias, I want you to tell me if I've kind of got a good idea of this, because this is all French to me, and it's all new and it's all very exciting. However, I want to make sure I'm getting a good handle on it. So it seems like what Sid is saying is that we have these different things, right? So let me think about networks. So like Facebook, right? And then so I'm a node, and then like you might be a node, and what's really important is not us, it's about like the connections with us and everyone else within our network. Do you think that sounds right, Elias?
Yeah, like from that understanding, it's like everything is interconnected, and what's really important is how that data relates to each other. And I think with graph theory, that's what we're trying to teach the computers how to understand that data, because other than that, it's meaningless. So I think you got it. I think
Interesting.
you got it. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I think I'm getting there. Yeah, and it's really interesting how dumb and how smart computers are, right? Because it's obvious. I don't know if it's obvious, but to me, I like to think about how things are interconnected and how they're related. But the computer has no concept at all about like, oh, the squirrels and the trees, they might be connected somehow, because I always see the squirrels on the trees. It just takes these two separate data points and is trying to it doesn't do anything with them. We have to tell it to do it. And in order to do that, we're doing it with graph theory. Does that make sense?
It does.
That's
It's like,
completely.
Yeah,
I was just
you're both saying yes, so I'm feeling pretty happy. What, what do you think, Elias?
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's about making the computer understand the relationship between those two items. That's all.
Ah, very exciting. Let's see here. So we have this directed graph up here, and we have these nodes and vertices. And now I'm looking at this is another cool looking graph with a lot of lines. It looks pretty smart. Sid, what am I looking at here? So we were talking about networks, right? With like Facebook or squirrels and the animals of West Oakland. And now there's a picture of a brain. What's the link here?
Yeah, so this is something else that we can represent with graph theory. And kind of the cool thing about graph theory is there's a lot of different ways to represent data, even within like graph theory itself. So what we were looking at before with a social network, that was a directed graph. So, for example, on Facebook, if you're friends with someone, you're mutual friends, but you might follow a page, that page probably doesn't follow you back. Or Twitter, as an
Right.
example, there's a directional thing. I don't have a Twitter. Brian, you probably follow like Elon Musk, but he probably doesn't follow you back. And if he does follow you back, then there's an arrow in both directions, right?
Okay, right.
So that's a directed graph. We also have an undirected graph, which is the data could go in both directions. So like a two-way street. Then we have something called a weighted graph, and that's what we're looking at here. And let's go back to the social network example before I get into all of my like nerdy medical stuff, just so that we like can keep everyone on the same track. So if we're looking at a social network example, we can look at that as a directed or an undirected graph. And remember, that means the data can flow either in just one direction or in both directions. But we can also look at a social network as a weighted graph. We can examine, you ever go to Instagram and like the person that you like always seem to see on like that first story, it's like always the same person.
Charlie D'Amelio. Sure, yeah.
Right. And then
I
you
don't know
always
why.
click on
They
that
just
story.
recommend it to me.
Yeah.
Right. So then you always click on that person. And so therefore you end up kind of like putting the algorithm in a feedback loop, because then it sees that you engage with this person a lot. And so that level of engagement is weighted. So we could measure engagement. Let's just take a super simple example. Let's say I follow Cardi B on Instagram and I like her posts like every single day. Well, that line gets just like thicker and thicker and thicker. And that's how we're relating that relationship, because I interact with her stuff a lot. But I might be following Elon Musk over here and I only look at his tweets for like half a second and I only like them like once a month. And so that line's going to be represented in a much thinner way because our engagement isn't as high. So we can represent kind of the depth of the relationship as well as maybe the direction of the relationship with graphs and, any combination thereof. So bringing it back to the picture on the screen, what we're looking at here is actually neural connections. So the thicker lines, and everyone can see the caption. So the thicker lines represent higher connectivity and the thinner lower connectivity. So what this would mean in terms of like a functional MRI would be like blood flow, or like synaptic firings like towards like one area of the brain. So that's what we're looking at here. Is we're saying, we're using a lot of this like temporal lobe over here, but we're not using a lot of this like frontal lobe right here right now for whatever we're measuring.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. I think it does. Elias, you know what it kind of reminds me of when I look at this brain? It reminds me of like, when you're walking on like in nature, and then if you walk that path all the time, then like you start to get a little it's called a desire path, I think it is. It's like you kind of cut out this path, and then the more people that are walking down the path, the bigger that path actually gets. And it seems like that is that kind of the right way of thinking about this, you think?
Yeah, another way I like to see it is, the thicker lines are the lines that are more important. Not necessarily that the other lines are less important, but those are the more used routes. So I think, with the bigger the line, it means, oh, hey, something must be really important at the end of this point. So that's another way to look at it as well.
That actually makes it a lot more clearer for me. There's something, yeah, that's actually really interesting. The bigger the road is, the more likely it is there's something important on the other end. And
Exactly.
would it make sense, like, all right, Elias, if that's the case, then I guess everyone kind of has their own roads, right? Because like what you find interesting is going to be different than what I find interesting. So your roads are going to be different than my roads. It's not the same roads. Is that right?
Exactly, because we all eat. Okay, so between me and you, I have my own interests because of, the way I was brought up and things like that. So, I might have an interest to a certain genre of music. So the road to, let's say, pop music might be thicker for mine versus your road. And essentially, my playlist might be bigger with pop music and your playlist might be less. So, that correlates back to the lines.
I wouldn't be so sure. There's no bigger Taylor Swift fan than me. So now I want to get into something that looks really complicated. And one of my favorite things in the world is to look at something that's really complicated and I have no idea what's going on. And then someone who is smarter than me about this particular thing can explain it. And that's why I watch a lot of chess videos, for instance. I know Benny Cashman watching chess, but he's so cool. Chess is cool. That's why I do it. So I'm looking at this. It's an adjacency matrix. All right, let's read a little bit here. Adjacency matrices do kind of just what they sound like they do. Of course, you agree. They represent connections or edges between different nodes using a matrix. We can look at an example to illustrate what this might look like. So you talked, Sid, earlier about undirected graphs and directed graphs. And then I'm looking at this undirected graph, and it's next to an adjacency matrix. What is are those two things the same thing, or are they different things, or what am I looking at here?
Yeah, so let's break it down real quick. So let's go back real quick to just understand the layer of abstraction that we're dealing with. So computers, we know that on the hardware level, computers don't deal with all of these like lines and circles and stuff like that. A computer doesn't know what these lines and circles are.
Neither do I.
So. They're not right. I know. So, they're not, it says A, B, C, D, E. So that's it.
I know what that is.
So basically, yeah. So anyway, so basically what this diagram is showing you is that in order to get the computer to understand the connections between the stuff, we have to kind of represent it in a way that the computer can see. So we can do that in one of three ways. And this is number one. So we're looking at an undirected graph right here, this ABCDE kind of pentagon kind of thing. And then we're looking over here at this matrix, and we can see that this matrix represents like a binary classification of is connected, isn't connected. So let's look at AA. AA is represented by a 0 here in this corner. And it's represented by a 0 because A doesn't connect to itself. The reason that this is related to the undirected graph is because if we look one row down at AB, we see a 1. That means AB is connected. And then if we look over one column and up one row, we see BA. BA also has a 1. That means B is connected back to A. So were this a directed graph where A points to B, we would only see that 1 in that BA column. Other way around. We would only see the 1 in the AB row, but we would see a 0 in that BA column, in column 1, this one on the left. So we can look at an adjacency matrix and determine whether we are looking at an undirected or a directed graph by virtue of, does the 1 exist both ways? Can we look at the inverse? So can I look at DC and CD and see the same number representation? So
yes,
what this does, yeah, exactly. So this basically, an adjacency matrix works for an undirected or a directed graph, but we can look at the matrix and tell which one we're talking about. And then we have this diagram on the side just to kind of show you what that graph would look like and what this adjacency matrix is specifically representing. So you can actually see the visual and then kind of like what the computer would understand.
I see. So you're saying, all right, so we have an A here. Oh, can I zoom in? Yo, that's sick. All right, so I have this A over here, and then I go over to where B is, and there's a 1 right here.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I go to B, and then I go to A, so we have A going to B, and then we have B going to A, there's also a 1. So because those two numbers are the same, now we can make that representation of, okay, this is a directed graph because we have something on one side and we have the same thing on the other side, and that's what a directed graph is. Is that right, Sid?
It's an undirected graph, but absolutely,
yeah,
you are exactly on the same page. No, the terminology gets tricky, so we're right here with you, but you have it perfectly correct.
Because you would think, it's directed, like it's going, we have the same thing on both sides, we're directing it, but okay, it's undirected. And if it was, oh no, it makes more sense, Elias. It makes more sense to me, because if it's directed, then it makes sense that there's not two things on the both side, right?
Exactly.
Because I'd have to send it, and then I might be 0, but I might be sending you a 1. Is that right?
It is a bit confusing, but that sounds right. Yeah.
I'm wondering what chat thinks about all this. We have an all-time high in the chat right now. Yay. So I'm curious if chat is, if maybe this is hard for me and chat really gets it. So here we have an edge list that represents a graph. And Elias, is this kind of like what I was looking at with the matrix?
It does look like that. You can kind of see the same representation here as well. I'm not too entirely sure.
It says
maybe Sid could explain, yeah.
Yeah, this edge list represents a directed graph. I'm good at reading the comments. And so is this the same thing that I was looking at up here, Sid? Is this how you would do it in code? Or maybe is this, what this looks like to me? This looks like an edge list.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly what it is. So this is actually quite different than the adjacency matrix. So like I said, there's 3 different ways that we can translate a graph into code. I'm gonna see if it lets me draw on your screen real quick. Oh yeah, I think it's gonna let me draw on your screen. Okay, cool.
If it does, that's sick.
Oh yeah, so let's see if the chat can see this. I don't know. Okay, so this represents a graph that would look something like this. So this would be a directed graph, and I'll show you why in just a second. Can we see this? Oh yeah, it's showing up. Okay, cool. So this edge list is telling me vertex 1 or node 1 is connected to node 2. And the reason that I used arrays to represent these is because arrays are an ordered data structure. And it's okay for anyone watching if this is all starting to feel very confusing. Graph theory is not simple, and it can be a bit confusing. So then we say that 2 is connected to 4. This is node 4 over here. Excuse my bad handwriting. This thing is hard to write with. And then 4 connects to a 3. And then it looks like 1 also connects to a 5. Hold on, let's see if I can write a 5. It's the hardest part for me.
That's a baller 5.
This graph,
it's big and bold.
Big 5 energy. So this is what this this is what this graph represents, or this edge list represents, excuse me. This is kind of what the graph would look like. And keep in mind that the positions of all of these nodes are totally arbitrary. What's important, like I could have drawn the 2 up here. I could have drawn like the 3 down here. It doesn't matter. What's important is the direction and like what node connects to what other node. So we can see 1 is connected to 2, but also to 5. And nothing points back to 1. And we know that because these are like an ordered, like, does anyone remember ordered pairs in math? This is exactly what this represents, but in code. Yeah, Elias gets it. So I could also represent these programmatically with a tuple, which
I was going to say, it looks like a tuple.
Yeah, it could be. So the math, okay, it gets a little weird. The math notation of this would actually be a directed graph. And then like to show an undirected, we would do like the curly braces. So the math notation is like a little different than what like programming language actually like accept as like ordered and unordered, but we don't need to get too into that. Basically, the whole point of any of these different ways of representing a graph is to give it to the computer in a way that the computer can understand. So there are certain like space and like, you know, there's certain space considerations for when you're storing a whole matrix with a bunch of 0 values, but then there's also like time complexity considerations when you're trying to traverse through an edge list and figure out what node you're looking at. That's a whole other discussion for maybe a different day. But basically, just for now, keep in mind there are 3 different ways to represent a graph computationally in a way that like a computer can see this data and understand, okay, this is what I'm looking at. Because the computer doesn't know any of this. It doesn't understand any of this, but it understands lists. So we can kind of listify the graph and still maintain this like knowledge of our relationships.
Wow. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And oh, cool. I was hoping we'd get to keep that for the entire show. But all right. So here's kind of really what I think. This is what people are really asking about, Elias. This is what the people want to know. I've heard enough about the graphs. I've seen enough about the matrices. I kind of get it. All right, I don't get it, but I do kind of get it, right? I get that we're dealing with like directions of things and how things are connected, and like I'm connected to you on LinkedIn. I'm sure we are, right? And I'm connected to Sid on LinkedIn, and that makes sense to me. But I'm having a hard time figuring out what this actually means in real life and in practicality. What do we do with this?
We do a lot of things with this. So one of the most practical examples that I can assume everyone who's watching the stream right now has used is a maps application. So even if you're super old school and you're like going back to MapQuest days, or if right now you're on like Apple Maps and you're on like Google Maps, it doesn't matter. Your maps application, your GPS that gets you to where you need to go is using graphs behind the scenes. 100%. And then they're using shortest distance algorithms to figure out what's the fastest route. What's the shortest distance between all of these different nodes? So between all of these different like intersections in a city, what's the shortest distance to the specific address that you want to get to? And that could be, I'm going from Oakland to LA. That could be, I'm just going from West Oakland to like downtown. It could be any of those, but you're using graphs all the time without realizing it. The other thing that you're using graphs for, behind the scenes of your social media applications, those algorithms are using graphs. So those machine learning algorithms are using graphs to figure out who you are likely to want to follow, whose posts you're likely to want to see. They're figuring out what to show you on the explore page. They're figuring out if you go on like Amazon, and I hate using Amazon as an example because their prediction model is like just like notoriously bad. But if you go on Amazon, it's maybe using it honestly might still be using like linear regression or something, but because it's so bad.
Scrubs.
But likely.
Just kidding. We're on Twitch. We love Amazon. Yay. Amazon owns Twitch for those.
Oh yeah, that's funny.
Yay, Jeff Bezos.
So basically, everything that you interact with.
My bad. Go
everything
ahead.
you interact with online is likely using graphs behind the scenes, and there's some tricky things to actually like getting a machine learning model to like work with graphs, because machine learning models don't like non-contiguous data structures that take up not a fixed amount of space, and that's a whole other conversation that we could talk about later. But basically, just know these are the things that are doing all of the things. So graph theory is actually behind like just about everything that we do with the internet on a day-to-day basis, and that's pretty cool.
Elias, I want to ask you. Sid was talking a lot about machine learning. What does she mean when she talks about machine learning? I guess I could ask her, but I'd rather ask you.
So here's my perfect example. So you know how you go to Google, you search for something, then you go
Yes.
to Instagram, and it recommends an ad from what you searched on Google. So basically with machine learning, it's basically taking a bunch of data. So you basically train the machine to understand different patterns. And the best example is patterns that we have in our everyday lives. For example, let's say you take route A every single day. Now your phone might pick up, hey, you're going to this certain location every single day at this certain time. You must be going to work. So once you have a large enough data set, you're able to do a lot of predictions a lot easier than a normal human would, because computers can process this a lot faster. Now with like Google Maps and Apple Maps, what they're doing is they're taking that data and they're able to predict, okay, from point A to point B, what is the shortest route? Is there any traffic on the way? And that's what machine learning is. It's taking data sets from previous route trips and figuring out, okay, this person got to this point at this certain time. And that's really the core of machine learning.
That makes sense to me. The machine is learning more about me the more I use it. I'm giving it more data, so it gets a bit
Exactly.
smarter. That makes sense to
Exactly.
me. I've noticed my phone has been trained very well because it started doing things like, hey, we noticed you go to bed around this time. Do you want to set your and you wake up around this time and you always set your alarm for right before class starts. Do you want us to set your alarm for you like every day of the week before class starts? And I was like, yeah, okay. It's weird that you know that, but okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I guess you would know that. And then other things like with the face recognition, because I have the fancy new iPhone, and all I have to do is just look at it, and then oh, you can't see it. All I have to do is look at it, and then it unlocks. But what I noticed is that if I had a hat on, it would be kind of a little bit trouble. If I had my mask on, or if I had my sunglasses on, it'd be trouble. But after I've done it a few times and I've entered in the code manually, it kind of it's like, oh, I've seen you before. You're wearing the glasses today, aren't you? Yeah, no, this is our guy. Yeah, let's let him into the phone. Would that be an example of machine learning too, Elias? The phone recognizing it?
Exactly. Yeah, and you brought up a good point. When you wear a hat, the phone doesn't have enough data to connect two and two together. So it's like, wait, is this the same person? Is it not? But the more you use it, the more it's able to depict different patterns. So when you wear a hat, it goes, oh, there's an obstruction, but it's still the same person. So yeah, that's basically machine learning.
I always wondered, like, what if one day, like, I shaved and like I don't know, I got really tan and like spiked my hair up and then put some training data on that. And I gave the phone to my friend. I was like, here, just use it. And he looks nothing like me. And then to get some training data on that. I wonder, Sid, is it possible to do that sort of thing? Can you trick these machines if you're intentional about it? Is that a possibility to like kind of bias these machines in a certain way depending on like what the inputs are that we give it?
Yeah, so I'm like dying inside right now because I'm like a really big privacy advocate. So like the whole like I'm gonna set your alarm for you. I'm like melting. Okay, so I personally just kind of along those lines, I don't use like the biometric like things.
It's
Because they're
probably
actually
smart.
like, yeah, they're actually not that secure. Um, but yeah, I mean the answer is yes. So like this kind of thing, there's like this like saying in computer science, and it's like, you know, the proverb of computer science is garbage in, garbage out. So,
Hmm.
if you train your machine learning algorithms on bad data, or if you like sufficiently confuse it enough by like constantly changing the way that you look in like a drastic enough way,
I'll
then
show
like,
you.
yeah, I think, yeah, I definitely think that you could like, confuse it enough for it to, maybe let a friend in or whatever. And I would have to do more research specifically on like what Apple is doing with like their iPhone's face recognition and how hard it is to crack. I recently was listening to something about the Touch ID and how that's actually easier to trick than like brute forcing like a sufficient password. So
Get out of here.
Yeah, I'll get you some resources on that. Maybe that's a topic for another day. But
next week on Tech
garbage
Topical.
Out.
Interesting. Garbage in, garbage out.
Dive deep into privacy. Why you shouldn't let your iPhone learn all your habits.
Actually, no, that might actually be a thing. So it's very interesting, this graph theory, and I'm reading here, using graphs to represent network analysis of the brain, neuroscientists are able to map key findings related to diagnosis of schizophrenia, given that there are certain markers for the onset of schizophrenia: less efficiently wired networks, less local clustering, less hierarchical organization. And I'm less efficiently wired networks, less local clustering, less hierarchical organization. Elias, can you give me a little bit of an insight into what those words are talking about?
Well, using my deductive reasoning skills, looking
Yeah.
at the first one with less efficiency,
Yeah.
with less efficiently wired networks, I'm guessing, with the first bullet point, it works. But the reason why it's not efficient enough is because there's not enough interconnectivity between the two. So it's going to be a lot harder making those connections. So for example, back to the music thing, I might have, let's say, 2 songs in my playlist, but that doesn't necessarily mean I like this song. Now, the more songs that I add, the more strings I'm attaching, the more roads that I'm attaching to those connections. And that, based off of that, you can kind of see, the more strings you add, for example, the last graph, you're able to see there's a bigger web connected.
Increasing randomness. Interesting. So we can use this graph theory for it seems like not just strictly ordered data where we know everything that's going on, like a road. Like we kind of know everything that's going on with a road, right, Sid? Like even without Apple Maps or Google Maps, we could pull out our own map, old school style, and actually figure out where we need to go. But for data where we don't even know what the connections are, would graph theory be able to help us to make connections that like maybe we don't even know they exist? Is that sort of the idea?
Yeah, so the really cool thing about this example that I found super, super fascinating is that this isn't actually, to my knowledge, the paper that I linked is just about diagnosing schizophrenia and treating schizophrenia. It's not actually about machine learning at all. But what's so fun about it is that, like, basically they're saying, we're going to look at the interconnectedness of people's brains, right? So we're going to look at like what part of your brain is talking to another part of your brain. And by looking at the relationship between the parts of your brain, we're able to see whether or not you're likely to develop schizophrenia. And we know that schizophrenia typically onsets in like someone's mid 20s. And so if you look at a teenager and they're starting to show something that might be like a pre-symptom, you can then say, oh, wow, based on like your functional MRI, we can see that you're actually pretty likely to develop this. And we can start getting you like medication and stuff before you ever have to deal with like a full scale, like, breakdown or, whatever. So what's super cool is that like we don't necessarily know, like we can use things like functional MRI to actually image someone's brain. So you don't necessarily have to have a pre-knowledge of how these connections look, but you could theoretically go in blind and just have a bunch of images of healthy people's brains, right? So if you look at this from a machine learning standpoint, you can look at like a binary classification problem. Is it a 0 or is it a 1? So we go back to the adjacency matrix. Is it connected or is it not? So we could say healthy brain, healthy brain, healthy brain, healthy brain. These are all zeros. These are all don't have schizophrenia. And then we could look at a different person's brain on an MRI and we could look at the connections and we could say, okay, these are different. So this is likely to be like a 1. This is likely to like have schizophrenia. So yeah, I mean, you could absolutely use graphs for all kinds of different things. And it can even be something that gets as complex as like the actual connections of like individual neurons in like a human being's brain.
Wow, that is fascinating.
So Brian,
Hit me.
I might need to get an MRI just to be safe.
Right? All this talking about schizophrenia. I'm like, oh man, I wonder what my graph theory would say. Yeah, no, this is super fascinating to me, especially. So I want to recap exactly what's going on here. Where's that picture I really like? This one I really like. This one I think makes a lot of sense. And I'm even going to zoom into it. Yeah. So we have Paul Barron, we have all these people. And so I came in not knowing really anything. I'm leaving thinking that graph theory is something we do with computers that is able to connect different things together. And then when we connect those things together, the machine learning models can make those connections for us. And then we get more like actionable insights from it. If I was going to speak like a consultant, we start understanding and identifying key areas to increase our operational capabilities. That was pretty good, right? I had an interview for a consulting internship. I hope I get it. But that makes a lot of sense to me. So what would you think? I'm curious what both of you would think about, like, what is sort of the cutting edge of graph theory? Like, what is this, knowing this now, and we know about schizophrenia, we know about roads. Is there any sort of like outside of that, like some big scientific a breakthrough that you could see coming from this, or how does this relate maybe to like other technologies that we know about? I'm kind of curious about that. I'll ask that
Yeah,
to
I think
both of you.
oh, sorry.
No, please, Sid,
I'm a super nerd, so I'll
tell me.
answer first because I've thought about this in depth. Some of the really cool things I actually listed down below in the article. I think that there's potential, and I actually couldn't find any like specific studies happening on this. But I feel like there's potential to look at like an ecosystem and predict the effect of a specific trigger on an ecosystem. So in California, we have wildfires. You might be able to look at the ecosystem and look at a bunch of past data and predict how the wildfire is going to affect the I don't know, like the tree frog population. I don't think tree frogs live in the Bay Area, but
Too
you could look at
expensive.
something like that. Yeah, something like that. So, how could a stimuli affect or how could a stimulus or multiple stimuli affect like a given ecological thing, whether that's like water toxicity, deer population, tree growth for the next couple of years. Diagnostic modeling is huge, and it's actually the inspiration for writing this article. That's one of the reasons that I came to make school is diagnostic modeling and pharmaceutical development. You can look at for pharmaceutical development, you can look at what combination of drug or of chemicals is most likely to create an effective drug. And that's something where you need to know the relationships between all of these different chemicals. You need to know how the molecules are going to bind together when combined a specific way to know what's likely to make the most like optimal like compound, the most like likely thing that's going to be the next like big vaccine, the next big Alzheimer's treatment, the next big cancer treatment, all of these things. So there's a lot of really cool things that we can do with our data once we understand how it's connected.
Elias, what do you think about all that? Would you agree with that statement? Do you think that that's or is this just this much ado about nothing? Like, yeah, it's cool graph theory, but it's really not that big of a deal. What do you think, Elias?
Yeah, I'm on Sid with the whole tech nerd. A recent project that I found out about was Neuralink from Elon Musk.
Oh,
And they had a recent discovery. They were able to read if I'm not wrong, the neurons of the pig, and they're able to predict its movement before the pig actually makes the movement. And from there, they're actually able to control the pig because they know that this neuron is associated to moving the leg. And I think with graph theory, you're able to make these connections. And I'm not sure how Neuralink does it, but it sounds a lot like graph theory to me. So I think with that, it's both scary and pretty cool because once you're able to understand the brain and what controls your movement, that's basically controlling a human being. So it can be both fascinating as well as pretty scary. So that was like the very first thing that came up to mind. um yeah.
I'm going to try and find that video because that's such a fascinating video, and I'm on Twitch, so I can do these sorts of things. So I'm going to do
Yeah.
Elon Musk, Neuralink, and then
Pig.
pig.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's it.
Let's see here. Do you think? I hope there's. I want to find. Do you think it's this first one? Because I want to find a video where I'm not going to get like 30 seconds of real content and the rest is, oh no, not ads. And I even pay for YouTube Premium. I don't know why they're giving me this ad. It's one of those unskip. Oh no, it is skippable. Okay, we skipped them. Don't worry. All right, here we go. Let's look at this.
I'm not too sure you have your sound on.
You can't hear it?
No, you have to change your settings on Zoom really quick.
Jordan, the voice in my ear. How do I make the sound come on?
So go to where you click on share screen. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to stop share. I'm going to share the screen. This is worth it, Twitch chat. And actually, we can take this moment to go ahead and hit that follow button. Yay, following Tech Topical, because we do this every week, and it's always a good time. If you thought this was good, just wait till you see next week. All right, now I think we'll be good.
Well, I'll walk right over and show you. So what we have in pen number 1 is Joyce, and she does not have an implant. Obviously healthy and happy. We're trying to get Gertrude out. This is how you know it's a live demo. So here's Dorothy. And in the case of Dorothy, Dorothy used to have an implant, and then we removed the implant. So this is a very important thing to demonstrate is reversibility. So if you have a Neuralink, and then you decide you don't want it, or you want to get an upgrade, and the Neuralink is removed, is it removed in such a way that you are still healthy and happy afterwards? And what Dorothy illustrates is that you can put in the Neuralink, remove it, and be healthy, happy, and indistinguishable from a normal pig. Oh, thanks, Dorothy. Here we go. Great. Okay.
Here comes the magic.
Great.
Yay, Dorothy's here.
Okay. This is a high-energy pig. All right. Gertrude, thanks for coming out. So what the beeps you're hearing are real-time signals from the Neuralink in Gertrude's head. So this Neuralink connects to neurons that are in her snout. So whenever she snuffles around and touches something with her snout, that sends out neural spikes, which are detected here. And so on the screen, you can see each of the spikes from the 1,024 electrodes. And then if she snuffles around, touches her snout in the ground, or you kind of feed her some food, pigs love food, then you can see the neurons will fire much more than when you're not touching the snout. And that's what's making the beeping sound. All right, cool. So as you can see, we have a healthy and happy pig, initially shy, but obviously high energy and kind of loving life. And
that is super fascinating to me.
Exactly. And this is very recent because you can even see the masks. And
yeah, once you can. Good point.
Exactly. So once you're able to understand what fires those neurons, like where those neurons are firing from, you're very easily able to associate different movements of the pig and basically fire those neurons manually without the pig's knowledge. So yeah.
Wow. So what happens when we start firing off some neurons? What does that mean?
Yeah, so this is where things get a little tricky. I think so far with Neuralink, in that demonstration, all they were doing was just measuring the signals. And this is something called a brain-computer interface. This is something that has already existed in medical technology. I think some of the initial kind of iterations where this was the development of something called deep brain stimulation with Parkinson's patients. Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disease that causes shaking and a lot of other things, but most notably shaking and like kind of a loss of motor function. And the interface is able to go into the brain and help kind of fix some of the connections that are degenerated over time in someone who has this disease, improving their quality of life prior, and hopefully the length of their life as well. So this is kind of where Neuralink wants to go. But I think all things start with good intentions. What's the thing, like the road to hell is paved with good intentions or something like that.
And I've heard that.
With any proprietary thing, and even with some, community standard things, there's this line between holding true to ethics and making money. And sometimes those two things aren't always compatible. And so, even though Elon's out here and he's like being really ethical with his pigs, and I know some
Look
people
very
might
happy.
be sensitive to, they look very happy.
Yeah.
And a lot of like improvements in human quality of life, we have animals to thank for it. And he seems like he's doing a good job. The pig trainers probably get paid a decent amount of money and they seem pretty happy too. So it's all good. But at what point do the good intentions go to, okay, well now Google wants to like, put some kind of like variation of a third party cookie in the implant in your head so that they can more optimally target ads to you. Or like, the government, which already has a backdoor into a lot of our technologies. For example, Apple talks about your privacy a lot. The FBI has a backdoor into all of your messages. At what point is it like, oh, well, they need a backdoor into everyone's Neuralink implants so that they can just like shut down criminals when they, figure out who done it or whatever. So
Or
it gets a
someone has the
little
wrong thought or something, right?
right. I mean, and then you go up to an even higher level of kind of conspiracy theorizing of like, when does it become like a level of social control, which we want to think can never happen in the world, but has and likely will again, because we're humans and we're a little flawed. So yeah, it gets a little tricky. I'm much more interested in like tech for social improvement, and I kind of want to just like impart this like sense of like, know your values and don't support people who do like crazy things. Don't support companies who are doing things that you don't agree with, kind of thing, because at some point it's kind of a matter of like, when does this technology fall into the wrong hands? And when we get into something as like invasive as like brain computer interfaces, it gets to be a really big conversation. So yeah, it's a tough one for sure.
Makes sense to me. Elias, I want to know what are your outlooks on this? If you look into your crystal ball, I'm sure you have one in your setup. When you look into your crystal ball, are you seeing something that's looking pretty good, pretty positive, or do you think that this is all going to be? Do you think we're on the highway to hell here, as Sid say?
I have seen too many episodes of Black Mirror to know that something is bound to go wrong. Just because Elon Musk is a guy who follows ethics doesn't mean the next guy is. Just because
Right.
Elon Musk's team is able to figure this out doesn't mean nobody else can. So once somebody who is smart enough to figure this out with the wrong intentions, it comes down to who's gonna stop them and ethics as well. So there's a lot of factors that go into this, and it's scary, but with technologies and with the advancement of technology, there's no real way to stop that unless you like stop technology. So
Mm.
it's a matter of trust and hope that people have some goodwill, and that's
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
It reminds me of a statement. I think it was it's a rather famous statement, but I think I heard Naval Ravikant say it first. And it was like, he was talking to business leaders and he was telling the business leaders and entrepreneurs, he was like, really what you kind of are looking for is you you want to start a company that's so easy to run that even an idiot can run it, because one day one will. And I think about that statement a lot, because what about with machine learning? You really want to focus on making a system that is kind of trustless. Like, we don't have to trust it because it's going to be designed to do the thing that we want it to do, which is a lot of talk with crypto and blockchain and all that sort of stuff. And we don't have time today, but it's a good thing I stopped myself. Otherwise, we'd be here another hour. But it kind of reminds me of the same sort of sentiment. We want to make a graph theory. We want to do a machine learning model. We want to do Neuralink in a way that it's, even if someone evil wanted to use it for wrong, they can't do it. And we have to be thinking about this, I think, ahead of time. We have to be on the proactive side of it, because we can't assume that everyone that has this technology is going to be, just a wonderful person. One day, someone might even be a wonderful person and be doing the right thing for their company. But what's right for their company might not be what's right for us as an individual. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about. I don't know if am I standing on a soapbox here, Sid? Do you think or am I way off on that? We'll be fine.
No, I think we'll be fine. I think you're perfectly correct. I think just like one thing that I would add is just like a lot of people who do really bad things have great intentions. Some of the world's biggest travesties have happened because a bunch of people got together and were like, this is the right thing to do. So I think it's always like something to be cautious of is this like dichotomizing like this hero and villain, because it doesn't take a villain to come in and make Google, right? Like Google's not a villain, but like, you know, or like Neuralink isn't a villain, Elon's not a villain. Like governments aren't necessarily villainous, you know, but they think they're doing the right thing. And sometimes, you know, it's on us to just like have the critical awareness of what's going on kind of at all times. And especially in this industry, I think we have a big responsibility to just be like, no, I won't work for a company that doesn't align with my values. Doesn't matter what the paycheck is. And like, no, I won't like, you know, help push this technology forward that I think like hasn't been fully thought through, you know, even if you're trying to pay me a lot of money. And I just think it's a responsibility that we have as like consumers to say, I don't believe in this, I don't agree with this, as soon as we see something that we don't agree with, not 10 years down the line after, like, you know, then things get real bad and it's kind of hard to say anything about it. So yeah, I definitely think that,
we can't be a bunch of mob wives. Do you know that term? Mob wives. It was a term that was made up because the mobsters, they would go out and be doing all these evil, you know, kidnapping people and shaking people down, and then the wives would be like, oh, you shouldn't do that, but they were perfectly happy to wear the mink coats and to go out on the town and buy the fancy cars. So they were perfectly willing to take in the benefits, but they weren't willing to do anything to actually stop what they didn't believe in, because the bennies were so good. And I don't know, Elias, do you think we're going to be a bunch of mob wives?
You know,
I could kind of see it. I could kind of see people being like, maybe, yeah, I'll let Google take control. I don't know, it's easier.
I mean, we've already let these companies into our lives. Like there's a site on Google that lets you see every prediction that Google has made about you. So I think, yeah, it's a very fascinating site. It's able to guess, you know, your age and things like that. But I think, you know, a mass majority of the human population, they don't really, you know, care or understand you know, the greater scale of what's at stake. And I was thinking about this question as to, can we use graph theory to make these predictions about where technology is heading? You know, we already have the data sets of human, you know, interaction, you know, what you do on a day-to-day basis. Could we use that data to figure out what your true intentions are? So I think that's the real question.
I love that. We use the graph theory to defeat the graph theory. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Exactly.
Well, that was a fascinating deep dive into graph theory. I hope you all enjoyed it, Twitch chat. If you did, make sure to give us a follow and do all that fun stuff. And we would love that. I would love that personally. I think it should be, I think everyone should follow. I think that it would enrich their lives, but that's just my opinion. I don't know if you agree. Hit that follow button. And I want to give a special shout out and a special thanks to our guests today, Elias and Sid. And if you want to check out this article, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat, or someone will, and I'll put it in my chat, and then the voice in my head will put it in the chat, and then you can read it and get a better understanding of it than even me. And I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you so much for coming. This has been Tech Topical, Tech's best talking show. Make sure you like, follow, comment, and subscribe, and connect with everyone like Sid and Elias everywhere you can. And I'd also like to give a shout out to who am I shouting out? Open house. Shout out to the open house that we had today and all the people who are there, who are here from there. I liked hanging out with everyone. I hope you liked hanging out with all of us. And while it wasn't exactly the in-person experience, I think it was still something pretty cool with that digital space. Elias, you were there.
Oh yeah, I definitely was. It was a very, very fun experience. Had a lot of fun meeting, you know, the staff and the students. So
it was cool, right? That virtual space, we moving all around.
Yep.
Sid was there. Sid was a big star. Sid starts talking. Everyone starts coming around. And
I have I don't think I've ever been this well liked in my whole life. So, you know, was sweet.
Yay,
Sweet
we love
experience.
Sid. Sid's the best. All right. Thank you all so much for coming out. Hit that like, follow, subscribe button, all that good stuff. And I will see you all next week here on Tech Topical, Tech's best talking show. Bye-bye. Yay.